How do you see this whole connection of B2C and B2B, and what can we learn?
You've got to create memorable experiences. And in B2B, I think we've been really bad at that. And I think that approach is super interesting on how you can combine media assets, how you can combine audiences to achieve your commercial goals.
Yeah.
Why not actually do it well? Instead of using that budget on another ebook, why don't you find a more creative way of telling the story?
Welcome to the Revenue Marketing Real Talk podcast. Today in this episode, I have a special guest, part of our new series with a special format where we bring industry experienced executives that have done a lot, know a lot, have a lot of experience. No pressure here, Andrew. But help me welcome Andrew from Paddle. You've joined Paddle in early 2022. Paddle's raised almost 300 million in venture capital money. You've then acquired Profitwell for 200 million. And that's actually how I got to know you. So I remember like it was yesterday. It was at SaaS in Barcelona in 2022, where you were hosting this side event, and it had this huge headline documenting the acquisition of Profitwell. And I was like, wow, that is so cool. I've never seen anything like that, because usually when legal stuff is involved, people tend to not tell or show or talk about anything like that. So I think that was really special. And I think you've been the driving force behind this, being the CMO of Paddle now, overseeing all global marketing efforts. What made you do this in the first place?
So a couple of years prior, I'd sold my business into an insight venture-backed roll-up. So we were sell-side in a deal, and then we went and bought 4 or 5 businesses over the course of the next 18 months. So I'd seen a whole bunch of M&A. And then when I joined Paddle, I knew that we might have some ability to go and acquire businesses as part of our strategy. And the Profitwell acquisition came about pretty much immediately after I joined. And having done several other transactions over the course of the last couple of years, I really wanted to, add a bit more experience telling into the process. All good marketing starts with a bit of customer insight. And the insight here is that Paddle's customers are global software founders who are desperately trying to grow their businesses. And all of them have got one of 2 aspirations. Either they want to sell their business or they want to get big enough to buy other businesses. And so the insight behind the documentary was we were going to be in this acquisition process. So why wouldn't we tell the story inside the deal room for our customers and our prospects who want to be involved in acquisitions in the future? So it was something that was not very covered, not very discussed. And we had an opportunity, a moment in time to do that. So we grabbed the opportunity and had a go at filming it.
And were there no fears behind doing this? Maybe of the founders even, no, we can't do that. That's like, what will the VCs think? All the future investors, was there any emotional kind of fear behind that too?
I had a very simple conversation with our general counsel, Mariam, and I said, we'll record everything. You'll have it under lock and key in a Dropbox. And if everything goes well, we'll tell the story and you can improve it. And if things don't go well, we'll have not really spent much money on just recording it. And we won't need to go anywhere with it from then on. And from the founder's perspective, Christian was very up for it, founder of Paddle, and Patrick, PC, founder of Profitwell, is very media savvy. And so I think they were already doing some behind the scenes work their side too. I'm not sure what that story would have been if we didn't end up acquiring them. But together we were able to tell that story.
How a failed acquisition looks like.
Exactly. Yeah. Well,
that would have been good too.
It's still good content.
Yeah,
still
100%.
good content.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? When I think of Paddle, always this kind of media company first thinking approach always comes to mind. And I think that's also what Paddle really stands for. Doing this very innovative kind of marketing, thinking, hey, we need to become a media company, just educating our customers at scale, but not with only education, kind of theoretical hard content to consume, but also with this entertainment part. So what I'm always wondering is, this mindset of becoming a Netflix, for your own company, would you say every B2B SaaS company should have this approach? Where is it relevant and where is it not?
So I think sometimes when we discuss media companies or becoming a media company, we get lost So let's go back to the first principles. I think we should all be building content that's engaging, inspiring, educational, entertaining for our target customer. That's a great way of differentiating in a very busy competitive landscape. Number two, we should all be doing content, building content that has a red thread from the topics we're talking about down to the product value proposition that we're selling. And thirdly, I think there's something really interesting about episodic content. You've got a podcast here, you're speaking regularly to a growing audience, and so people know you for revenue marketing. And if you are able to commit to regular content on a similar theme or similar format, your audience starts being engaged with and then subscribing to, whether technically or not, being engaged with an ongoing series. And I think that's super interesting because much of what B2B marketing, SaaS B2B marketing is about is these one drops. And I think building episodic formats where you're taking a topic and diving deep time and again means that you build an audience around that topic cluster that's super important for how you can build your business in the future.
So should every B2B SaaS company do it, or would you say there's a time and place for it?
So if we reduce it to those three first principles, I think every B2B SaaS company should be doing those. But does it mean video? Maybe, maybe not. It could be as simple as an iPhone. It could be text updates on LinkedIn. It could be something else. So I don't think it has to necessarily be a video format, although I'm a big believer in the video format. And also it depends on your go-to-market. So Paddle serves thousands of software entrepreneurs globally. And so we're able to speak at scale and build a brand to demand engine where we're building this community, building this brand, building this awareness about us, and it filters through to our demand engine. If you haven't built that, or if you've got an extremely enterprise whale hunting focused target market, then perhaps there's a different approach you should be taking. But yeah, those first principles I think everybody can adopt.
But even Salesforce, they created Salesforce Plus now, which is also this kind of Netflix mentality, and they serve enterprises. So
yeah, 100%. And in my first SaaS business, Ideo was a personalization business. It was small, and we were going after these whales. Salesforce was a customer. We were doing content personalization for them. And our belief was that in our podcast, and we were quite early in the podcast game, our belief was it wasn't about the audience. It was about the people in front of us. And so we used to get target customers to come and speak with us and then use that, cut those clips up and use them in our marketing efforts. And so I think you also have to think creatively about why you're doing this. Is it for the relationships? Is it for the audience? Is it for the product proposition, the positioning? And being clear about the why behind it is fundamental.
Yeah. What I find very fascinating and what I've been reflecting also now coming back from Golden Hour, where a lot is about this media company building, like entertainment stuff. If we compare B2C and B2B, mostly in B2C, there's a lot of, sometimes it's actually influencers that have a lot of audience that already are very deep into this content game and do have episodes. The biggest influencer in the world, Kim Kardashian, she's got this huge audience, and from that audience, she's then started building businesses, right? And she's worth over $1 billion now, which is crazy. And in B2B, I feel like it's going a little bit the other way around, right? You have a business first, you have a product, and then you feel like, well, but we kind of also need the community to actually help scale even further. So then at some point they look at, okay, why is B2C so successful? And then they start investing heavily into community. How do you see this whole connection of B2C and B2B, and what can we learn?
So firstly, the audience and the product, there has to be some connection. I've seen it come unstuck both ways, where people have built an audience but then don't have product in order to sell to, monetize the audience, and the opposite way around, where people have a really compelling product but they actually don't have anyone to sell it to. And I think that's the interesting merge here, is that media companies are extremely good at building attention, and SaaS businesses are extremely good at monetizing. And so combining those two together, you've got a really interesting powerhouse. So if we go to your question of what can we learn from B2C, I think there's a whole bunch of things we can learn from B2C. There's always, a few years ahead of us. And I've been thinking lots recently about the concept of B2B lifestyle brands. So if we take consumer lifestyle brands, Nike, Lululemon, Red Bull, as three easy examples, they are all about marketing the lifestyle aspiration rather than their products. their products are actually a non-compulsory entry point into their community. You don't have to wear Nikes in order to go and play basketball down at the local gym, but it is a badge of identity.
Yeah.
I was in Covent Garden a few weeks ago with my kids in London, and we walked past the Lululemon shop. And as we walked past, there were maybe 20 guys and girls all limbering up, ready to go on a run with the store manager. That's a fantastic example of a lifestyle brand execution into real world. Now, were all of them wearing Lululemon kit? No. But this was something that was an emotional experience, a together experience, a community experience that was very clearly linked to their brand proposition. But actually, the shop next door where they were meeting was not central to the experience they had together. And we can use examples from Red Bull, an energy drink that sponsors and creates amazing content around extreme sports. We can use all these examples. And so I do think this concept of a lifestyle brand gives us a few learnings, and we can dive into those if you're interested.
I find this fascinating because something I've also been observing recently is that these big influencers, they stand for a specific lifestyle, right? Like Logan Paul, one of the biggest US influencers, also YouTubers. I mean, he's done a lot of adventure stuff, extreme sports and stuff like that. And then he's brought out this drink, right? And it's also already turned into a huge success, into a B2C product and company lifestyle. But people don't buy it because the product is exceptional. They buy it because of the lifestyle it kind of portrays.
Yep.
And then also there's Gymshark. I think one of the greatest successes is because of the community they've built, right? I mean, they've even created runners clubs and their own gym and all that stuff. And also then Iman Gadzhi, not sure if you know him, he's also created the drink around his lifestyle. And we can see it more and more. And those products, they crush all numbers because people identify so much with the lifestyle. And I think it's very interesting to observe, and there's clearly a trend in B2C. But what I haven't understood yet, and maybe you can help me, is how can we transition that into B2B?
So I think there are a few learnings that we can dive into there. The first one is this understanding of an aspirational future. I think businesses that really understand the future that their customers desire, and those customers are businesses, but also the individuals in those businesses, they really grab hold of something. So if we take some examples, take Salesforce as an example, right? We've used that example a few times here. Once you're in the Salesforce community, Trailblazers is this educational journey you go on through certifications where your career improves as you go through those steps. You've got this meeting ground at Dreamforce or at the different world tours they do, where you can meet with your community, and there's this idea of progressing towards this, this ideal outcome, this growth outcome. So I think firstly, there's a case of understanding, identifying, and communicating this aspirational future for your customers. The second thing I think is interesting, you've touched on it, is the people, the community side. So I think we can learn that we have to join dots between our community members rather than just marketing to all of them. There is that genuine sense of shared community, but also to your point, that yourselves and key people within your tent speaking outwards are influencers, thought leaders about the topics where you want to own, the topics you want to have as the topics you want to have as ideal futures for your target customers. So the community piece, I think, is really interesting. And then thirdly, you've got to create memorable experiences. And in B2B, I think we've been really bad at that. And so you used the documentary example. That was memorable to you. It was in Barcelona 100%. A couple of years ago. It was a shared event, right? It was in person.
Until today, I use this example actually in so many conversations.
Yeah, or it could be
it's free advertisement.
Or it could be swag, right? It could be swag, or it could be it could be online. It could be video, whatever it might be. But those are memories that people make together. And so if we think about that, so we've got a sense of an aspirational future. We've got a community that we go there with, where there's an identity. And we've got these memorable experiences on the journey we point back to. All of those, I think, are ideas that B2B can learn from. And it's not just the snazzy Salesforces. I think of GitHub. All my developer friends, there was that phase where everyone was moving to GitHub. And that just became almost the lifestyle add-on for any developer. It made their lives easier. It made their teams' lives easier, that transparency. the credibility it gave you, the sense of progress it gave you. So I think you can do this in most sectors where you've got a large enough target market.
Yeah. And how do you do that at Pedal now?
So firstly, it all comes back to, do we really understand our customers? And we serve entrepreneurs who have a self-serve software product. Most of them are from non-US, non-UK markets. We have loads of US and UK audiences, but there are so many vendors trying to serve those VC-backed businesses, whereas we love serving globally distributed software businesses. Do we really understand the problems they face? Do we really understand the challenges in front of them as they go from zero to IPO? And so at Paddle, we want to understand them more and more. Today, I'm meeting with 60 or so software founders in Hamburg. I love traveling around and meeting people face to face to understand their challenges and their problems. And then once we understand where they are, we understand what we do to help them. We understand how that fits into an overall journey. We talk about these invisible barriers to growth that these software founders face. I remember experiencing those as a software founder myself. I wanted to focus on the product and the customer, and suddenly there were legal issues and hiring issues, and how do we deal with this tax, and how do we price our product? Those are invisible barriers to growth that we can go and solve. And so we understand our audience, we understand our product, and now it's about how can we be incredibly creative about communicating that? How can we break through? Because I think mediocrity is really, really competitive. Chucking up another ebook, extremely competitive. Yeah. Doing another Me Too post, extremely competitive. But what's not competitive is filming a documentary about an acquisition we did, or sending a device into space to process a payment, or doing some documentary storytelling about some of our customers and how they've started in villages and then ended up selling around the world. I think there's some really interesting space in those areas.
Yeah. So what's the next kind of what's the next development phase of where will this kind of go into when we now see more businesses creating their own Netflix kind of platform? And if we look at B2C, I mean, there's brands that use big celebrities as their face of the brand, like Roger Federer or Cillian Murphy, and like people like that. Do you think this will also be a case where there's this big, I don't know, Dreamforce event, for example, and we will see, I don't know, Roger Federer become the face of the conference? Or would you say that could be an opportunity, how this will develop? Or would you say maybe not in B2B?
I do think celebrity endorsements in B2B is super interesting. If you can find an alignment between somebody who is well known and lines up perfectly with your values, I think that's super compelling. Can be extremely expensive, but if you've got a mass market appeal, even if it's a B2C product, that's a super interesting way to go. I also just think that in a market which is becoming increasingly competitive, businesses that work out their fundamentals and just execute on them week after week, month after month, year after year, end up building that competitive advantage, that moat. And often that moat is in brand awareness. I don't believe we're in a world of just winner takes all. At the same time, businesses who have spent the time and spent the resource and spent the thinking to build that audience awareness and affinity, every study shows when you've done that in your target segment, your demand conversions go up. Yeah, it's really simple. And so I think doing that ahead of time is a competitive advantage. And in a down market, if it's hard to acquire new customers, this is something you can do reasonably cost effectively and make a pool to fish out of in the future.
So we'll be seeing Tiger Woods on Pedal Studios soon.
I'm not sure we could afford Tiger Woods. And you mentioned Netflix and Paddle Studios a bunch. I think it's really interesting that video is one of the encapsulations of this trend that we are seeing. But I don't think it's the only one. I think video is super compelling in how it communicates personality, in how it can communicate like kind of that rich experience. But just putting video as the format choice, I think undermines what we're trying to do here, which is understand their context and deliver value into that context. And so, many businesses, they don't do this because they don't feel they've got a nice studio, or they don't feel they've got the right kit or the editing ability. And I just think that those are false obstacles we place in front of ourselves.
100%. I mean, just look at TikTok. What kind of stuff works there? Almost no one has a professional studio. All they do is kind of dance in front of a mirror, right?
You've obviously done it, yeah. But if we think about kind of where this goes, I draw parallels with the category creation trend that happened 3, 4, 5 years ago when everyone wrote the books and everyone tried to create their own category. Now, I believe in the fundamentals of that approach. But if everybody creates their own category, you have categories of one. And a category of one is not a category.
Yeah, by definition.
By definition, a characteristic of a category is you look behind you or around you, and there are followers, and there are other co-leaders, and there are people ahead of you. And so you have to be careful with this when it comes to Netflix and building a media company. Are you going to build this media company on your own domain with an audience of 1 or 2 or 10 or 20? Maybe that is worth it. But I do think there are some really interesting partnership opportunities here too. And you talked about celebrity partnerships, but it could be partnerships with people who have an audience that you're interested in. It could be partnerships with other trade bodies or other competitors.
Yeah.
And I think that approach is super interesting on how you can combine media assets, how you can combine audiences to achieve your commercial goals.
Yeah. We're already very deep into long-term brand plays, demand creation kind of stuff. And coming from a time where the economy was kind of going down a little bit, we had to focus a lot as marketers on really hitting those pipeline targets so that we can generate short-term revenue. How did you manage to still invest into that long-term play on Pedal Studios, for example, while you had such a big pressure on hitting short-term goals? And what was your justification?
The job of every CMO is to manage 2 timeframes. This quarter's pipeline and sometime in the future when we want a brand position and an audience. That second one is very ethereal and difficult to measure.
Yeah.
But I do believe we've got to constantly operate on those 2 timeframes. And if we only operate on the first timeframe, then we lose out on our preferred future.
Yeah.
Because if you don't invest in brand, you pay the price in customer acquisition cost every single quarter that goes on. Yeah. And so for us, there was a few things. Firstly, our leadership team, our founder, Christian, our CEO now, Jimmy,
they
all
get
believed
marketing.
in that. They get it. They understand that it lowers customer acquisition costs, it enables us to reach the world, and it will be part of our exit valuation whenever we choose to exit. And so that leadership belief is really important. The second thing is that I think many marketers divide up their brand and their demand spend or their programs. And I think that's a crying shame. Because if you do that, it's so easy to cut the brand stuff. If we think about what those 2 words mean, for me, in every interaction, you want to generate resonance so that you earn attention. And you want to do that for 2 reasons: to change people's mind, brand, how they perceive you, and to get people to act, demand. And if you combine those into the same programs, then you're able to fund them out of your existing budget. So the documentary, now you remembered that. You said you've retold that story lots of times.
Yeah.
It feels like it could be just a little brandy play. But the documentary showed up in our Gong recordings, I think 50 or 60 times in the next couple of months with prospects. People remembered it, and it was something that was interesting, inspirational. It was a reason for them to go and find out who we were. So we saw that very clearly. Even to this day, I have people WhatsApp me or people get in contact and say, that was something that we did. Yeah. That's something that we saw, and we're doing what we do now as a result of it. The space campaign is another example. Yeah, it was a nice 3-minute video of sending a rocket to space and processing a transaction. Again, very clearly linked to our customer insight about people wanting to go globally. But behind it was an ABM program that generated demand. And so I do think we have to think about things holistically and not separate out our budgets and teams into camps where you can really easily suffer reductions in one of them.
I also believe that a lot of the parts that brand covers are also being covered by really creating demand. But also there's more to it. When you actually focus on the demand play, it's also not only, hey, we got a big brand and this is what you should perceive about it and stuff like that, but also when this brand will become relevant for you to get to know the product better and really kind of know the timing for it. Like why should, for example, at what kind of time you look into Pedal, for example, as a product, which brand doesn't really take care of. It's more like the more people we reach, the better kind of stuff. But demand is more focused on the impact that one touch point has with a person. And I think connecting the 2 obviously will be the most powerful, but also the hardest, the most complex.
And we've just got to do better. So I talked there about brand campaigns that have a demand impact. I completely agree. It's traditional demand campaigns that have a brand impact. So if you're doing a podcast, why not do it well? If you're doing a customer story, why not actually do it well? Instead of using that budget on another ebook, why don't you find a more creative way of telling the story?
Yeah.
Your SDR call scripts, your SDR outbound outreaches, are they building brand or are they actually undermining it? Every one of those interactions has an opportunity to move both hearts and minds as well as actions.
And I mean, with every outreach also, you can decide if you want to kind of get more people to act, which is also the short-term play. But then also there's a possibility of doing it in a long-term way of just adopting the mindset of how can I actually provide most value with that email and actually create demand so that people in future will then come to me. And I think that's also what just differentiates the ones that have short-term success versus the ones that really thrive in a long-term sustainable business then. What you've just said around as a marketer, and I think that really does differentiate good from great marketers. Great marketers always have the 2 time zones in mind. How hard was it for you when you had this pressure coming from everywhere? VCs, probably your CEO, maybe even your team, also customers, partners, to still invest into the long-term play?
Partly it's because I never signed up for, aspired to be a CMO. I was a software founder and then ended up taking that part of the business. And when we exited it, that was the seat I got. And then it was a natural next step when I started working with Paddle as an advisor and they had an open CMO role to step in and help them in this way. But I'm seeing it from the business perspective, not the marketing perspective. So I think that's really important. And I think that's one way marketers can always aspire to grow is by seeing the business engine, the value creation that's happening across every touch point in the business rather than just their piece of it. And then secondly, it's about having a thesis. I think so many marketers get bogged down into being data-driven. And of course, we all want to be data-driven. But there's no point optimizing around the data points you can see if you don't have a thesis about why people are acting, why people are responding, what is the problems in their business, how they decide to buy. So building a thesis around those things that you can then test and prove with your data, I feel is much more compelling than just saying this campaign's working or not working, and therefore we're going to turn this off or that off in a specific time frame. So in what we were doing, we had a very clear 3-part thesis on our marketing. And this has been true since the day I joined to now, 2 and a bit years later. Number 1, we want to make down market frictionless. What that means is we want to increasingly invest in our self-serve so that people can come in, even if they're the tiniest business around the world, and they can go live if they want to without ever talking to us. And so we want that brand to demand engine to work. And it really does work. 27% of our revenue right now is self-serve. So we want to make down market frictionless. Number 2, we want to be surgical in finding new markets. So we just don't want to go up the revenue curve and say we can serve bigger customers that look like those we're serving today, because that might not be true. We want to find pockets of new GMV, pockets of new revenue in businesses that we can serve really, really well with our existing product and proposition. So we want to be surgical up market. And then the third one is, we dubbed it as we want to create a 2-horse race. When you're a software founder, you've got a choice. Either you build up your payments infrastructure in a piecemeal way, you buy a PSP and then you buy a tax tool and you buy a reconciliation tool and you hire some engineers to stitch it together, and you hire a payments team eventually to build out more customizations yourself. You buy a finance team to work it all, or that's piecemeal, or a platform. You choose someone like Paddle to take care of all of that for you. And so that was a positioning goal. So we want to be frictionless down market, surgical up market, and we want to create this 2-horse race. Because if every single software founder or software leader knows that there are 2 choices rather than just one, the default piecemeal, then we'll end up winning. And so those 3 were really important to us. And then the final thing that underpins everything we do is we want to be the most helpful brand in SaaS. We want to access more and more data, analyze data, show people what the market's saying, show people what's working and what's not working. And if we can do those 3 things while being the most helpful brand in SaaS, we win. So that sat behind all of those decisions we made.
I love that. I think that's also how we approach marketing. We want to be the most helpful agency for B2B SaaS companies when it comes to modern marketing and revenue marketing. And it's played out so well. I mean, it's always a long-term play, but you see results coming in from the work you've done a year ago now, right? And I think what you've told me also in our conversation before this podcast, that you've achieved something like 150% of your marketing targets in Q1, which is insane. I think not many people or companies can say that now, but it's probably most likely because of the work you've done during the hard times of last year and maybe the year before that's led you now to hitting those goals.
It's been really interesting how we've started this year. And I think there are a few things that are underpinning that. I do believe there's signs of a bit of a comeback in growth rates in the markets we serve, which is...
tell us more about that. What can we see in the market, Andrew? So you're sitting on so much data. What's important for people now?
Yeah, we see about 36 billion of ARR of software and subscription revenue. So we're seeing a few things. On consumer software, we've seen a real kick over the last couple of months. It's been great to see that come back. In B2B, we've had 3 consecutive months of growth, which is the first time we've seen that since a year and a half ago.
And is that across all regions globally, or is it mostly in the US, for example?
No, so we're actually seeing some of the emerging regions grow faster, much faster than the US and the UK. And so companies that internationalize are doing very well right now.
So what's emerging regions for you? Is it like India or?
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends for each company and the products they sell. But in Latin America, in India, yes. Yeah. I think in Southern Europe as well, Eastern Europe. So we're seeing some really interesting opportunities there. And the main learning there is don't just believe one market is your goal, because actually that makes you at huge risk of the macroeconomics in that industry. So I think we have started to see that. I think secondly, you mentioned just the hard yards over the last year or two. Last year was hard for everybody, right? At Paddle, we went through a CEO transition as our COO, Jimmy, stepped up to be the CEO. We rebuilt all of our core platform and launched that. We went through big market downturn with Silicon Valley Bank and all kinds of other nonsense going on. And in the midst of all of that, we still grew, but it was hard. And so I think as we've entered 2024, yes, we're seeing some market resurgence, but also we're seeing the value of alignment across our company. And I think as someone who's mostly been involved with quite early stage businesses, it's hard to overestimate the value of an aligned organization. And I know you've spent a lot of time at Yoyaba building that alignment across all of your teams. But at Paddle, we've got multiple product lines. We're serving all of these different ICPs, all of these different ideal customer profiles with different types of product, all with different margins. It's quite complex. But over the last year, we've taken care to line up behind a consistent strategy and then start executing on it. And it's been really, really good to see the results of that bear fruit over the course of the last couple of quarters. And then the final thing is, as we're chasing for new bits of GMV, new pockets of revenue, we're finding ways of being much more specific, customized, personalized about it. I know one of your propositions is helping businesses enter the German market, because you can add this localization as a dominant player within the German market. You can add this localization lens onto American and UK and other businesses coming and marketing here. And that's been a real learning for us too. We now have regional focuses and segment focuses in our marketing, which is much more customized than we have in prior years.
Yeah. So interesting. I want to, for the last part of this podcast, dive a little bit into about more you as a person instead of all your work topics.
Okay.
Because I've been knowing you for a bit now. We've spent a few days together. I mean, you're also on our advisory board. I've learned a ton from you, and we had many conversations. And for me, you're always the person who's like super relaxed and just, you're always happy. You're always so positive. And I mean, you've achieved so much in your career. I think it's outstanding what you've done. And even now, I mean, being the CMO of Paddle, I can imagine there's a lot of like, obviously responsibility that you have, a lot of pressure, high targets. I mean, just also looking at your growth rates, it probably is not always easy, I could imagine. But at the same time, I feel like you're so content with everything in your life, like what you do, but also you're a big family guy. I know that. So like, how do you stay so relaxed all the time? But you have so much responsibility at home as a dad, but also as an executive. Yeah. How do you do that? What's your secret sauce?
There's definitely no secrets. I think a few things. Firstly, I love the Winston Churchill quote, success is stumbling from one failure to the next with no loss of enthusiasm. And that sums up my journey. Loads of failures, but lots of enthusiasm to get back up and keep going. And I think some people just get beaten up by their own failures. And people who keep walking through, it's not they didn't have the failures, it's that they put on a smile, got up and had another go. That's really important to me. I do believe that optimism is a free catalyst. If you walk into a room with an optimistic mindset, you can gather people around you and you can start walking towards that preferred future. And yet so many people leave it at the side. And so I really believe that. And fundamentally, I love what I do. I'm very privileged to do the job I do. I'm very privileged to work with the people I work with. But even if everything fails at Paddle for a quarter, as you said, I've got a fantastic family, my wife and kids. I've got great friends around me. And I think putting things in that longer term perspective is really important for us because so many founders, so many leaders in businesses get caught up and their identity becomes intertwined with their career. Yeah. And we have to remember that we're human beings, we're not human doings. And separating those two identities, I think, is absolutely essential to being able to balance stuff that's going wrong at work with making sure you bring your whole self into the dinner table with your kids in the evening.
So when I talk to peers that are my age, also very successful, if they look at you, for example, you have everything they wish they had, right? I mean, you had an exit. You've probably made a lot of money already. You're not doing too bad now in terms of your career. You have a family already. You have a nice house somewhere around London. All that stuff, right? Like, why do you still put so much pressure on yourself every day of doing the CMO job if you didn't really have to? What is it that motivates you still?
I don't find turning up to work at Paddle as me putting loads of pressure on myself. Genuinely. I'm doing this job, I'm doing this role because there's a fantastic team around me and I really enjoy that. So I've done advisory work and I could just be a portfolio advisor doing a few bits here and there, but I love being part of a team. I really do. I love being part of a team, whether your back's against the wall or whether you're going out, on the attack. I love being part of a team. And so, that's really important to me. And secondly, there's a really interesting blend of the go-to-market experience I've had and the entrepreneurial experience I've had because we're serving founders and we're in a business which is in its scale-up journey where there's still enough broken about everything we're doing that we've got to use that entrepreneurial mindset to fix things on the fly as we scale. And I'm not sure I'd have anywhere near the same interest or motivation at a much larger business. And so both of those things get me up. I love traveling. I love meeting people face to face. That's a key part of my role as well. And so, no, I'm really content. And another thing that I've spoken about with a few people who are my age with kids our age is that this time in my life, I love the fact that I'm able to have weekends with my children and I'm able to have dinner with my children when I'm not traveling and I'm able to be there in a way that, those early days when we were building IDEO, it was all day, every day.
I can imagine,
And I'm very grateful now that, of course, I work long hours, I work hard, but there's a balance in my life that's sustainable that wasn't when I was founding a business.
How do you manage that? How do you keep that balance all the time?
So
because I don't have kids and I struggle sometimes even.
My version of balance is you think about a pendulum.
Yeah.
My version of balance is swinging from one to the other and maybe waving at the point of balance as you zoom past it. So right now I'm away from home and I'm completely focused on the meetings I've got all this afternoon, all this evening, hear this podcast. But tomorrow afternoon I'll be home and I'll be completely focused, hopefully, on picking up my kid from school. And so for me, balance isn't a steady state. Balance is being comfortable with swinging from one to the next. And I also think that it's important to have people around you who are willing to speak truth. I love my wife is able to bring real insight into when she thinks I'm pushing it too hard, when I don't have enough margin, and she'll tell me. Other friends around me who are willing to tell me that as well. And I think that's important because in the work context, it's rare that people will tell you that. So having people outside of work who are able to speak that is important.
Cool. Nice. One last question. What are you most bullish about in the next coming of months in the B2B SaaS marketing world?
Wow. In the B2B SaaS marketing world, that's disconcertingly specific. In the B2B SaaS marketing world, I'm bullish about a bias towards quality and creativity. I think it's really cool that we were in that event in Golden Hour in Brooklyn and seeing all of these people around us, creators around us, who are putting their heart and soul into what they're doing. I love that. And I think that is going to be buoyed by some market resurgence where we're going to start seeing some customer growth and net new customer growth. So I'm excited by that because I believe people who take a long-term perspective and understand the fundamentals of their business, who their customer is, what the market is they serve, how they can reach them, how they can measure that, and then just execute on that every day with creativity and with quality, are going to separate themselves from the rest. And so, yeah, that's exciting.
Especially with the rise of AI, where there's just so much quantities of content everywhere.
Yeah.
You will only differentiate with quality, right?
100% AI will do away with a mediocre marketer. You can't do that anymore because it already does a mediocre marketer's job well enough. So that's a massive challenge.
So what's the biggest tip you can give to all CMOs out there listening today?
So one thing that's important to me, and everyone says it, but not many people do it, is customer proximity. How many customers can I be with every single week? And how can I give the gift of customer proximity to our teams? How can I take that insight to them? How can I make sure they are going and speaking to customers? I think it's so important, particularly with our creative teams, that we give them two things. We give them customer proximity and we give them time.
Yeah.
And in the rigmarole of building our businesses, so often we forget those two things and then ask why there's no creativity and quality. You have to give those two inputs in order to demand those two outputs.
Cool. Love that. Thank you so much for everything you've said today. I think it was super valuable, insightful content. If anybody out there has a question to Andrew, I'm sure people can reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, grab me on LinkedIn.
He's a very approachable guy, so pitch your stuff. No, jokes aside. But if you have a question about anything we've talked today, feel free to add in the comments or text Andrew or me on LinkedIn. Yeah, thanks for listening, and I guess see you next week. Cheers.